Sanyin Siang is professor at Duke University and a director of the Coach K Center for Leadership and Ethics at Duke's Fuqua School of Business. And more, she's one of the most delightful human beings you'll ever meet. On this episode of Moments of Truth, Sanyin offers wisdom and grace on how great leaders respond to failure and how we can all lead with greater honesty. Take a listen. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. This has been an incredibly exciting project for me. I think it's going to be a really important book, and I'm been humbled by how the world is hungry for honesty and hungry for purpose and justice. So it's a good time. So I'm going to dive into our questions, and you're going to wax brilliant, and I'm going to listen joyfully. So one of the things that's been so impressive to me is the breadth and array of leaders you have studied, interviewed, talked with, and been around. It's quite an extensive collection of leaders. So I'm curious, to start off our conversation, Sanyin, when you look at a leader and you conclude, wow, she really is ethical. She really has a sense of integrity. You just know that. What are you seeing that tells you that?
So thank you so much, Ron. It's a joy to be here with you. So like you said, I do have the benefit of horizontality, where it's seeing patterns across different leadership styles and in different contexts, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, or even in the social sector, government sector. And in terms of getting a sense of whether someone is authentic and ethical, there are several tell signs. So one, I think about how immediately, do they have a sense of who they are, right? How well do they see themselves? Do they see themselves clearly? Now, none of us see ourselves clearly. In fact, that's one of the hardest things. That's why we coach, right? It's to help eliminate those blind spots. But you can really get a sense of whether someone sees themselves pretty clearly or not from how easily they're willing to be vulnerable, right? They're willing to be vulnerable. And so even in today's COVID setting, we're seeing you're seeing my home. That's my kitchen in the back. I see my kids, and I've seen so many people's dogs and kids, and there's just something very beautiful where it's enabling us to see each other more clearly in their holistic aspects, but also to show up more fully as ourselves. And so I think about how vulnerable they are, or whether maybe it's not vulnerability, but how willing are they able to bring their whole selves into that conversation. So if it's a conversation, I just remember meeting, say, Ellen Kullman, former CEO of DuPont. Now she is the CEO of Carbon. So ethical, authentic, real. And our first half hour was talking about family, because her children were very important to her. And then she also talked about how her dad had a gardening business, and she grew up just watering the lawns, and it was a very down-to-earth human type of conversation. And I think the leaders who are able to do that immediately, and because of that, they're able to build a connection, they're able to, those are the type of leaders I think about as authentic. And then the second type is they take more of an interest in you than trying to show off what they're about. So Bob McDonald, oh my goodness, former CEO chairman of Procter & Gamble, and then became the secretary of the Veterans Affairs, one of the most authentic, real people you ever meet. And when you first meet him, he will ask you questions about you. I mean, here he is, this highly visible public CEO, and he will ask you questions about you, and you just get a sense of, because they know also how to close the distance, and this caringness about others, I think gives them a grounding of what it means why it's important to do the right thing. Because it's not about that reputation. That reputation is about the connection with others, right? And not about how great am I. It's more about how can I make a difference.
You interviewed General Robert Brown, and in that interview you discussed with him. He said to you the importance of never take purpose for granted. which I thought was such a profound statement because so many leaders do. I'd love to hear you talk about when leaders do take purpose for granted, when they don't understand how to make it present. Why do they do that, and how do they change that?
Ooh, that's such a great question, because purpose, at the end of the day, any pursuit is meaningless unless there's clarity around what the purpose, to what end are we working on. And I think it is easy to take purpose for granted in sense that we think it's communications, right? We think once it's been articulated, then everyone knows it, and then we never have to talk about it again because somehow it's magically seated in one's head. But it's easy to take purpose for granted unless we communicate and talk about it. And it's easy to take it for granted because, as something I learned from Coach K, it's not enough to know something. For them to know it, they have to feel it. And so that feeling part, feeling that purpose, what does that mean? And so one of the things I love working on is how do we inject a sense of meaning? Like purpose can feel abstract, so let's inject a sense of meaning into our work, and there's the CEO, Mark Geary, who runs a company that is about providing cures for cancer. And one thing he had was everyone in the company put up a big picture of someone they know who's dear to them who has cancer or might have passed away because of cancer. He started with him. He put up a picture of his mom, and he said, "This is why we do what we do every single day." I mean, what a way to make purpose felt and visible. But you're right, unless, and you think about the churn in organizations nowadays, unless that's constantly spoken of and it's seen and, and felt, we can forget about it and be caught up in the pursuit.
Look at an organization to see, are they living their purpose? Are they embodying it? Or are they just stating it and putting it away? How do you know the difference? What do you see that tells you, the tangible aspects, like those photographs, that tells you this company is living their purpose. This company just has one.
Yeah. So, and I think it connects with something you said earlier about purpose washing. I don't think anyone wakes up, any leader says, wakes up and says, "Oh, we only want to just talk about purpose, but we have no intention of living it out." Everyone has an intention of living it out. Mm-hmm. The thing is, living it out is super hard to do because being intentional is super hard. Right. Yeah. And being proactive is super hard, especially when it comes around the intangible type of things that we're talking about here. And so how do I know walking in when a company is living its purpose versus it just means something pretty words on a wall? One is I look for the passion in the employees. Right. And one of those employees is a leader. So you talk with a leader and you can hear that in their voices. Why are they doing what they do, right? But then it's also, there's the leaders, but sometimes there's a distance between what the person in the leadership position intends and then how is it felt on all the different stratas. So then talking to someone who is other in a company, oftentimes I would stop and talk to the person at the front desk and just have a conversation. And you can get a sense of how seriously are they taking their roles, yeah. Right? Or even talking to the assistants. Love talking to the assistants. And you can tell. And so and then you can also see the sense of pride, like, all right, are things like if there's a piece of paper on the ground, how long is it sitting there? I'll share this one story. So Coach K, I run the Coach K Leadership and Ethics Center at Duke University's Business School of Business. And Coach K would do this thing with his new class of recruits. When they come in, there's two things he does that I think is just so powerful. He says, every single person has matters on this team. And by the way, who's on this team is defined not only by the players, but also by the surrounding folks. So one of the first things every new person coming into that team has to do is they get a book and it's all the names of the cleaning crew. And he said, know their names. They may not be on the court playing with us, but yes, you better believe it, they are key contributors. They are members of our team that contribute to our winning. And so, and the players get to know, oh, that's that's so and so, and that's so and so, and have that conversation. And he lives that out. The second thing, the second story is he would do something where he would leave a piece of paper in the locker room, right? And then at the end of the day, he comes in. He's like, all right, and he calls the entire team together. And he's like, that piece of paper, on the floor there. You guys saw it all day. Now, I granted, I know you're probably thinking it's not your piece of paper, and therefore you don't have to pick it up. But this is our floor. This is our floor. And so you can just feel, these are the little things that that you get sense. Is there a sense of pride in what they do? Because when you believe in something, you take pride in it.
Yes. So when a leader asks you for help on how do I align who I am? How do I make sure that I'm living my values? How do you help them?
So one is, do you have clarity around what your values are? Right? That's the first thing. And actually, there's a difference between individual and the organization, right? So there's this little question I like to ask. When I go into an organization, I would say to the head of the organization, I was like, how's your culture? And everyone has a culture. The difference is it the culture we aspire for it to be, or is it something entirely different? And I would say, all right, so what are the top 3 values of your culture? And it would say, oh, it's a great culture. I'm like, do your employees know what the values are? And they said, yeah, of course. So I was like, all right, what are the top 3 values? And sometimes I would get like a pause, and they're not trying to think about I'm like, if you have to think about it, your employees are not going to be aligned with it. And then, but some of them would just, say, okay, it's these 3 things. I said, all right, so I'm going to go out there and I'm going to interview 10 different people, random people in your organization, see what are the top 3 things, and see how aligned they are, right? So I think one, just defining what your values are, and then how that is so important, and then is that shared and spoken of, and then 2, to be able to say, all right, if this is one of our values, how is it expressed, and is there consistency? So I'll give you another example. The San Antonio Spurs, 5 NBA championships. They're known for as culture. I mean, their culture is legendary. They're having a strong culture is legendary too, and it's consistent with why they're such a winning team. And one of their values is it's a team effort. It's always a team effort. So guess what? In none of their advertisements would you ever see a solo player. It's always with a team, right? I mean, something as simple as that. If it's team effort, then everything we show is team. It's so thinking through, and it's not an answer that but this is a team effort. It has to be a shared ownership. So getting ideas from the organization, such as how are we living out our values? How are you seeing it expressed, whether it's teamwork or integrity or this idea of the customer, putting the customer first. How are you seeing that expressed? And then saying, okay, are we also rewarding it when someone exhibits that behavior? Because that reward, and it doesn't have to be a financial reward. It can just be the leaders, the managers highlighting that as an example of this is how someone's living in alignment and amplifying our values.
So one of the, I think the really exciting findings for us was about honesty is so much more than just a character trait or a moral value. Honesty is a muscle. It's a capability. You have to actually work at being good at honesty, right? It's not just a thing you have or don't have. It is a thing you're good at or not so good at. And so I'm excited because honesty is something we can learn. Honesty, justice, and purpose are things we can learn to get good at and practice, both individually and as systems. So, as someone who teaches ethics at Cole, what have you seen in terms of leaders engaging in conversations about ethics and integrity and purpose? What light bulbs have you seen go on in terms of how they get more capable of these things? Not just in the knowledge of them, but in how they embody them. How have you seen that work?
So I think this connects back to something we started off the conversation with, which is the environment, the culture, right? The culture. You can put someone with, say, and I loved how you framed it, that it's a muscle that we have to keep practicing on. But it's not a solo endeavor. It's not a solo endeavor, right?
It's a capability for all of us, for sure.
And so therefore, if you have someone who may have a higher capacity for honesty, and you put them in a culture where it actually, what's the opposite of reward? It
discourages.
Yeah, penalizes you for honesty, then you're going to sort of be, it's just human nature, right?
You're going to suffer.
You take someone who is sort of have a mediocre capacity or lives in the areas of gray all the time, but you put them in a culture where honesty is how everyone is living it out, and it starts with the leader at the top. They're going to practice and practice and practice that muscle. So it's a team effort, and the culture and the environment matters. And it's not just it's not a solo effort, but it starts with understanding what are the values, and then what might be the trade-offs, and what would happen when you see those trade-offs. How will you react? And let's have a conversation about that, because the time to have the conversation isn't when the time to make a decision happens, as you know.
Right. Sanyin, this was I knew it would be a delight, and now I'm even more delighted that we had it, and it's so good to hear your voice, and thank you so much for lending your voice to the product. I'm grateful. Really, I am. We all eat at restaurants, right? We may not realize it, but each meal is a symphony of efforts from farmers, truck drivers, dish cleaners, line cooks, and even landlords. And in each meal is an opportunity for us to consider how our eating can create everyday justice. In today's Everyday Justice segment, Jarrod Shappell speaks with David Nayfeld to hear about the amazing work that he's doing in his San Francisco neighborhood to ensure that everyone is well fed and cared for. Take a listen.
David Nayfeld, thank you for joining us. I knew you by your awesome sign on Divisadero, great branding. Then I knew you by Gwyneth and I went to dinner at your restaurant the same night, so that was pretty fun. And then your breakfast sandwich, just a little strawberry jam in there, blew me away. But really what has caught my attention is how active you've been recently on issues of justice facing our city, facing independent restaurants. And I've been really inspired, honestly, to really kind of assess and evaluate how I think about my participation in the food system, how I engage here in the community. So I'm just really excited to share a bit of you with our viewers today. So thank you so much for being here and making time.
Thanks for having me.
So David is chef and part owner of
Yeah, co-owner with Matt Brewer as my partner.
And here in San Francisco. And I'm just curious, I mean, and maybe this will go into kind of your story a bit, since the beginning of the pandemic, I want to say, I've really heard your voice raised locally on issues of politics, the issues facing restaurants. I'm curious, has this always been something that you've been passionate about, something that you've always been involved in, kind of these justice issues or these local political issues or things facing the restaurant industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I'm not sure that there's a difference here, but it's more injustice.
Yes.
So when injustices occur, they seem to strike a chord with me, no matter who they're happening to. If I see it, or also if I feel it, or people that I know are experiencing it, injustice is something that has always struck a chord with me, and it's always moved me to action. And so whether that was in, middle school or high school, or getting people organized to back teachers and, for getting pay raises, whatever that may have been, I think that's always been something that I've kind of gravitated towards is getting in the fray and being a part of the action. I think I'm not I'm not a bystander. I'm not someone that likes to sit on the sidelines and just complain about how things are going. I prefer to be, on the field in the fight. And so, I would say over the past 9 months, it's become very clear that, a number of things are happening in conjunction, and they're compounding issues, right? Number one, our industry is crumbling, and that's nationwide and even globally. independently owned restaurants are struggling significantly. And I say independently owned restaurants because, the chains, it's been shown that the chains are not suffering in the same way, right? Like whether it's a dine-in chain, that was not able to pivot to takeout, right? Like those folks, the way they can consolidate debt, the way they can restructure debt, the way they can handle those hits is much different than an independent operator. Then the folks that are geared towards to go and takeout, they've been thriving. Honestly, year over year, they're actually doing better because, people are ordering food to go and they were better built for that. And they're built to scale in that way. So as I kind of stated, our industry has been paralyzed in a lot of ways. And it seemed like a good time to take a look under the hood and address not just the symptoms, but actually the root of the cause of what was happening, right? And the fact of the matter is we run incredibly unsustainable business models in the restaurant industry. We are constantly burning the candle from both ends, whether it be personally, whether it be at the, sacrifice of our family and our personal lives, whether it be at the sacrifice of our mental health, whether it be at the sacrifice of our staff's family and personal life and mental health. I think you then boil it down to local politics. All politics are local here in San Francisco, which I believe is the tip of the spear of how bad our industry can get. You look at other margins across the country, whether you're operating a business in Houston or Atlanta or Nashville or Denver, places like that, you can still do a double-digit margin. And frankly, a lot of people at the higher end are doing 20%, if not a little bit more. Here in San Francisco, you are considered to be lucky if you are doing high single-digit margins, right? And the majority of folks are operating off their whatever their San Francisco mandate number is, right? Like if it's a 4%, they're making 4%. If it's a 5%, they're making 5%. And that's a really, really, bitter pill to swallow for a lot of us who put everything that we have and everything, both like from an emotional standpoint and a time standpoint and also a resource standpoint. And so here in San Francisco, I think that we have gotten to a place where we have been incredibly inhospitable to small business in particular. There was a time where there was a ton of deference to the tech industry for growth, right, purposes, right? And you saw a lot of deals come out in that. And I'm not one of those people that poo-pooed those deals because I thought at the moment they were smart and they made sense. And there was ideas and dreams about building up Mid-Market Street and all those areas. There was unintended consequences downstream in terms of like much higher rents and a lot of different things like that impacted small business, of course, and also the labor and staffing. But ultimately, there was certain things to take from that, which is a lot of those people poured a lot of money into the local economies in terms of spending, GDP, tax base, all of that, right? So I think that you can't look at it as this like one side of the coin thing, like tech came in and it was bad or so on and so forth. They got tax deferrals or they got tax rebates, whatever it is, right? Like I think it's very easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and think back to 10 years ago as to like why these deals happened and criticize them. But in the time, I think, the late Mayor Ed Lee was doing what seemed right and did whatever he did with the information that he had. Fast forward to today, we are in an industry where vacancy level of storefronts is at an all-time high. It was before the pandemic, it was impossible to hire anyone, even if you were paying people well above minimum wage. People didn't want to live here, especially when then you boil it down to restaurants where they're getting out of work at later hours. Either A, they feel unsafe in the city, B, it's hard to transport to the city, and it's almost impossible to live in the city, right, at those hours. So you have this holy trifecta of challenging reasons to come work in the city when the truth is you could go work near Lake Merritt, live near Lake Merritt, and feel safer in Lake Merritt, right? And so I think all of those things compound the issue of, and then you add to the fact that doing business here is not incredibly profitable. So you're seeing a lot of folks who are leaving and who no longer want to do business here. And I think one of the things that's really upsetting is you see a lot of folks that are everything that San Francisco says it wants to be, right? Non-formula retail, folks that grew up here, folks that shop locally, folks that employ locally, folks that have a very progressive mindset, and they're just not able to thrive here. So you're watching those people look around the country to see where they can go do better for themselves and be a part of the middle class.
Yeah, I'm so struck by how systemic the injustice is that you're describing, right? So you actually started by talking about kind of the deeply intrapersonal part, right? Like just the toll on its staff, regardless of pay, right? Kind of on mental health and hours and work, and all of that. And then you begin to start talking about kind of the policy associated with, tax breaks in restaurants. Then you're talking about transportation. I mean, there are all of these things. And I think when people just see a restaurant that shutters or doesn't in a city or a town, they're not thinking about any of these things. So I'm just kind of marveling at the different systemic look you have at that, which makes me think about just kind of the broader food system as well. I mean, I think, when you think about sourcing, I've seen that on your Instagram and other places, you out at farms or out at the farmers market trying to get to know people and doing some of that work. Yeah, and there's so many other places of injustice. I'm curious for KFICO, how do you cut in? Like, how do you begin to think about, because your mind identifies all these injustices, I imagine it just feels like a buffet of things where you could start in on, and you're one relatively small restaurant, right? So what's KFICO doing to kind of address, all of these different injustices in and around your restaurant and within the food system? What's been a priority for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Listen, I mean, you could spend a lifetime on one of these things and probably not create all the impact that you really want to create. But, I kind of have a personal motto, and my personal motto is always think big. Anytime you think small things will happen. When you think big, you never know what will happen, right? I was a person with zero money in the bank, zero financial backers, and I came and found an old former auto body shop and decided that that's where a restaurant should live because it looked magnificent. And people looked at me and said that I was insane. And my partner and I, through years and years of working and relationship building and asking and earning and dazzling, built this incredible portfolio of investors and spent 4 years working with a city that wanted to do its best to figure out how not to have something interesting in that space, and and made it happen. And then from there, amazing things have happened. And I think the key to life is you got to think big if you want to ever make a real impact or a change. So to answer your questions, I think the main thing is, first of all, you think big and, how you want to affect change, right? At the end of the day, there's few levers that you can really pull that will make the difference in all of the things that I'm talking about. One is highly unlikely to happen. And that is that all of a sudden we can turn back time. And so that being said, what does that mean, right? Turning back time to a time where a lot of these fees and taxes were not as stifling as they are. The HCSO was not, strangling business and poorly constructed and poorly written. A number of these different things, right? Like you're not going to turn back the hand of time on all those things. But what you can do is look at a way to forge the path ahead, right? And so for me, I think one of the major things to consider here is the fact that San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities in the world. Yet when you go out to eat at a restaurant, the prices do not reflect that. If you eat in New York, if you eat in London, if you eat in Tokyo, cities that have a similar kind of like cost of living, you will see a price differential of sometimes 20 to 35% more than what you see here. When you see your average cocktail in San Francisco, it's like 14, 15 bucks. And then sometimes even still 13. Good luck trying to go through Manhattan and get a cocktail for less than 17, 18, 19 bucks at the lower end. And then at the higher end at places like Nomad and a lot of those really like a higher echelon bars, you're seeing cocktails that can go up into the 20s easily, right? You're not seeing bowls of pasta for, $14, $15. That's just not a thing there, right? Because they're looking at, for them, labor is certainly a cost, but for them, obviously it's rents. Rents are super high, right? And now that rents are becoming much higher here in San Francisco, but labor is really the major driver of costs. Labor and fees and taxes are the major driver of costs. We need to recognize the fact that our prices are just too low here. And that is ultimately what the change in culture is going to have to be. For us to all recognize that to change the culture of our industry, we're going to have to raise prices. Now, there is ultimately always going to be the argument where it's like, well, what about if you turn people off and you're doing less business, right? That's one argument. The other thing is, what about the inaccessibility, the folks that could never afford your place and now they're further from being able to enjoy your place? So I'll break that argument up, and I'm going to answer the second question first, which is, it is not the and this is going to seem insensitive, but it is realistic. It is not the responsibility of restaurants to ensure that everyone in the world can afford what they sell. That is not your responsibility. Your responsibility, in fact, is to make sure you are employing people and paying them well enough to live their lives. That is responsibility number one, right? And you can make an argument to say that if every restaurant viewed their responsibility as that first, then ultimately you would create more people in society that could afford what you're selling. Right. But we're keeping this artificial circular kind of like cyclical process of pay people as little as possible, give them as little as they can, thus they can afford the shit that you're making less expensive for them. Right. And so that is, I think, a completely unsustainable model. And it's, in fact, it's kind of like demonized our industry for not creating like great career paths. Right. So first things first is, if we raise our prices, we pay people more, and we start to basically make it a more, a more professional setting in which we say, okay, listen, you know what? The average retail worker makes 42 grand in San Francisco. The average white collar office worker makes 172 grand. We need to make it that the average retail worker is making 65 grand minimum, and that they can afford at bare minimum to live here, right? And therefore their lives and their livelihoods are just better off in general, and that they're able to spend more dollars in the economy. Now, you kind of bring that back to the argument, like point number one of less people are going to go out. I'm not a mathematician, but I'll tell you one thing. I would rather make 15% on $4 million revenue than 5% on $6 million revenue.
David, I'm so grateful for your time. I feel like we could talk for an hour more. Love the connections that you make and how systemic you think about justice and your role in creating that justice. So just really grateful for your time and your story and your work in the city. I'm glad to call you a neighbor and a Twitter follow. And I'm sure we'll come in and eat sometime soon. So
thank you very much. I appreciate
really
you having me.
Yeah, really
this was fun.
it.
Thanks a lot. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Treating failure with compassion takes courage, because the road to everyday justice is only paved with counterintuitive leadership. Organizational injustices often appear so routine that the need for justice doesn't naturally occur to us. It takes intentionally looking for it to find it. When something is unfair, true leaders willingly stand in the breach to right the wrongs that cause others to feel marginalized or mistreated. They make sure everyone has an equal chance of success. They use their power to actively seek out opportunities to help those they lead thrive and contribute their best work. They make sure that no one has privileges that unintentionally disadvantage others. And they are purposeful about making it safe for others to fail and learn, so nobody feels they have to cover up their mistakes. Till next time, keep leaning into your moments of truth so that you can be the example of what it means to be honest.